This program is a paid commercial announcement from Jacob Media Partners and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program is pre-recorded.
Pure Bull Beef Jerky wants to thank everyone for the overwhelming response to our favorite bag of beef jerky, Huck and Fought. Have you tried it? Locally produced in the Philadelphia region, this high-quality, healthy protein snack is easy to secure. Go to steersnacks.com and you'll see cherry smoked chipotle, cranberry smokehouse turkey, aloha pineapple, and yes, our favorite and your favorite, Huck and Fought. Go to steersnacks.com.
Jacob Media Partners presents The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. It's The Adam Malamut Show, presented by the law offices of Adam Malamut and Associates. Now, it's The Adam Malamut Show, hosted by one of the hardest working attorneys in South Jersey. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Adam Malamut.
And welcome in, everyone, to the Adam Malamut Show as we come to you from the Adam Malamut Studios. Adam, right over to you. Big show, double shot of the Adam Malamut Show this weekend. We're going to cover a lot of interesting ground on your topic of choice today.
Krause, we took off a couple weeks. It's great to be back. And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about before we came on the air is the changes in sports over the years. This is a really significant week for Philadelphia sports fans. Unfortunately, our Eagles are home. The Flyers are not playing well, but the Sixers made some big moves, and big moves literally in every sense of the word, right? So we gave up our backup center, Andre Drummond, who is a rebounding machine. He's a phenom. That guy sniffs, he has a nose for the ball. We gave him up. We gave up Ben Simmons, who for my friends who are familiar with my disdain for Ben Simmons, that to me is addition by subtraction. However, I'm concerned about where he went. We'll talk about that in a minute. We gave up a great three-point shooter, Seth Curry. I don't think he gets the credit for being the player that he is because of how great his brother is, but I think he had a very meaningful role with the Sixers. And, now we're making the run, right? We've got Joel Embiid having the best season he's had yet in his prime, and this is our greatest shot to bring it home. But interestingly, as we talked about the trade and we talked about sports and where they are today, one of the things we talked about is this crazy economy around sports. And you've got players now making $40 million, $50 million a year, and that's before endorsements hit. You remember, Krause, when Dr. J got that first $1 million contract? It was a while ago, right?
Yeah.
But look at how far we've come. So today,
a good doctor. I love that team.
Amazing. And
kind of, if you remember the parallel, the good doctor was, I think, starting to go on what would have been the downside of his career. The year they won the championship, but of course they had Moses Malone. Now, I don't know if you can parallel that between Joel and Joel and Harden. We'll see. And you'll see pretty quickly.
But they had some great role players that didn't get enough credit. You had Andrew Toney and Mo Cheeks and,
Mark Iavaroni, John Caldwell Jones. That's my favorite team.
Everybody had their spot. Everybody had their role. But the business of sports has progressed so much since then. It's amazing to think, and it was longer than I care to remember or I care to call it. But, in what was a relatively short period of time, the business has really progressed. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about whether the business of sports is taking the fun out of the game. I'm honored today to have two of my partners with me, Scott Sheldon, who's first time appearing on the Adam Malamut Show, and Keith Gentis, who's now an old veteran on the Adam Malamut Show. Keith is a tried and true, dedicated New England fan. It brought, swelling to my heart. It brought me happiness to see that Mac Jones fell apart in the last few games of the season, and I didn't have to hear about a Patriots playoff run. But we'll talk about that probably, I'm sure, in one of the later segments. So, Keith, Scott, welcome to the show.
Pleasure and an honor. Thanks, Adam. Thanks. Glad to be back.
So, The big business of sports. One of the things that we realized early on in the pandemic is the economic impact of the pandemic on so many different areas of our lives. But one of the things that I think was really brought to light is the people in sports who aren't making millions of dollars a year, the people in sports who are really the people who make everything tick behind the scenes, and how they felt the impact. During the pandemic, there was a shutdown. Stadiums were shut down. There was eventually the NBA played in, and I'll use quotes, a bubble. And players, when they weren't playing, had enough money that they could survive. When they were playing, they were making their regular paychecks. But the parking lot attendants, the food concession vendors, the merchandise vendors, all of the people who make the rest of this global economy tick, they all of a sudden found themselves out of work. And it's something that is certainly not lost on us. But, when we think of sports, I think that not until the past 10 years, 15 years have we really talked about the role it plays in the economy. And quite frankly, it's something that concerns me as a sports fan, because I love watching sports, but I just wonder the sustainability. We'll talk about that in a later segment. To give the listeners an idea, the sports market, the overall revenue is greater than $80 billion a year in America. The fantasy sports market, which I'm happy to admit I contribute to, much smaller than this number, is $8.5 billion a year. The number of adult Americans that participate in sports gambling, according to Morning Consult and World Population Review, is 13%. And that sounds like a small number, but if you think about how many people aren't even interested in sports, and then you look at the number of fans and the number of fans who are of a legal gambling age, 13% is a fairly significant number for American adults participating in sports gambling. In 2018, $158 million was wagered in Nevada on Super Bowl 52. $158 million was wagered for hopefully the lucky fans that bet on the right side of that to see our Philadelphia Eagles bring home the Super Bowl trophy. But that, again, Keith has no interest in that particular game. The average fantasy sports player is 37 years old. I'm personally dragging that way up. I'm an anchor on the higher end of that. The average player spends $653 per year on fantasy sports. And when you start to look at where our economy is and where salaries are and where people's discretionary income is, $653 for fantasy sports is significant. But that just shows you people's interest in sports and what an outlet it is for folks. So, Keith, I'm going to go right to you. The business of sports, I mean, what's your thoughts on the growth since you were a kid?
We've already alluded to the fact that I'm not a native Philadelphian and whatnot, and we come from an area, my family in New England, and we were longtime suffering Patriots fans, and there were times in the late 90s where I can remember being on the floor with my dad on a Sunday afternoon. We weren't watching the Patriots, we were listening to the Patriots because they didn't sell out, so we were subject to the local blackout. We're talking the Hugh Millen days, the Dick McPherson coach Patriots. We're not talking about the new iterations as well, when Parcells took over, or I should say when, Mr. Kraft bought the team and then brought in Parcells, and then we had a run with Pete Carroll, and then obviously it's been nothing but championships and love since Bill Belichick took hold of things. So, the kids now that are, I'll say in that age group anywhere from between 10 to 18, they don't know anything other than in the NFL being king, and that wasn't always the case. I believe the number started really skewing in the mid-90s when Fox took over the CBS contract, which allowed them to broadcast the NFC games. And as long as the money is going to just keep skyrocketing in terms of what these networks are going to pay. And now we're not even just talking about broadcast networks. We're talking about digital streaming rights. We're talking about the fact that Amazon's going to be the exclusive host of Thursday Night Football next year. We're talking about the fact that if you're not in front of your TV on the Sunday night, you can go on your iPhone, your iPad, whatever particular hardware device that you are using, and you can watch the simulcast on NBC Sports. You can jump on your Comcast app, and you can see things that you're not necessarily in front of your TV from. So the ability to consume the media is going up. The TV rights and all these streaming rights are going up. So I don't see this being anything other than a runaway train.
What do you think, Scott?
Well, I grew up with the Norman Bremen Eagles, and the fan base is the only thing that kept that team alive because the players on the field didn't do it. And
yeah, I mean, look, the Norman Bremen Eagles were like a completely different animal, right? And the Philadelphia fan base is something that, I mean, you and I grew up with. It's just a special group of fans.
Right. And before I had a momentary lapse of my brain power right there, what my idea was I really saw things turn when Jeffrey Lurie took over the Eagles, and it became big business in our town rather than just your typical blue-collar season ticket holders. The fan base kind of took on a different turn over the years, and it became, you could see really how the Eagles became a huge business. And, the seat licenses at the new stadium versus what it used to be to go to a game at the Vet or buy season tickets. You didn't have to kill yourself to do so.
Yeah, and it created a lack of accessibility. It's interesting, like back then, we heard about the Washington Redskins having these crazy waiting lists to be able to buy season tickets, and the same thing with the Green Bay Packers and other teams that were much more fan friendly. But with the way the finances were structured for the team and the stadium, it's almost like they didn't have a choice. We're going to take a break in a minute. When we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more into this, and we're going to talk about our experiences as kids. We talked about this off the air before we started the show, what it was like going to a game when it was actually affordable, and how really professional sports has almost outpriced the average consumer. So we're going to go to break. My name's Adam Malamut. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Again, I'm here with Keith Gentis and Scott Sheldon. You can follow me on Instagram at attorney_Adam_Malamut. You can follow me on Twitter at Adam S. Malamut ESQ. And for those of you who would like to see our beautiful faces, you can check us out on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, The Adam Malamut Show. We'll be back in a minute.
Thanks for listening to The Adam Malamut Show. If you need a lawyer or have a legal question, contact Adam directly. Drop him an email, adam@malamutlaw.com.
My name is Samari Cruz, and I am an officer. I've been doing this job for the last 23 years. And even with all the training and experience, the confrontations can get very heated. I was injured, and I was injured extensive enough that I was unable to do my job for a period of time. It was the first time that I was injured that bad. I didn't understand the process. I didn't know who to go and talk to. Working with Malamut Associates was terrific. I felt like I was being listened to. Adam, my first impression, I saw a man of integrity, very driven, like he was immediately on it, like he was willing to help. It made me feel like somebody listened, somebody understood that I was truly hurt and that somebody cared.
And back here on the Adam Malamut Show, interesting topic and a timely conversation.
Thanks, Krause. So when we left off right before break, we were talking about the affordability and what really has taken place in the economy of sports, and we were talking specifically about the Philadelphia Eagles over really during the tenure of Jeffrey Lurie's ownership, since they built Lincoln Financial Field. We talked about briefly, we touched on the personal seat licenses and the price of entry, the price of access has risen so much that the average fan, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners feel the same way, you'd love to go to the ball game, whether, look, last year it was an odd year for us to compare stats, but historically, Major League Baseball, which has a lot more games, gets total attendance of greater than 70 million fans. NCAA football, which has a lot more teams, a lot more games, just by virtue of the number of teams, you're talking over 40 million in attendance. The NFL, you're talking over 17 million in attendance. I mean, these are well-attended events, but they're not attended by the average fan because the average fan can't afford to go and buy 4 tickets for $150 a ticket and then, 2 hot dogs for one person and a slice of pizza for somebody and a Coke or a beer or whatever the beverage of choice is, a bottle of water. By the time you get out of there, that event has cost you $1,000. Scott, as a kid, going to a sporting event, what did that look like for you and your family?
Well, my dad was cheap, so when we would go to the sporting events, we wouldn't eat, and it hasn't changed. So if he took me to a sporting event now, we wouldn't eat. But typically, you could bring what you got in your pockets. If you had a candy, if you brought a sandwich, you can eat with what you brought. And if I was lucky enough to twist my dad's arm into getting me an ice cream cone or a bag of peanuts, I'd be lucky that day. But it was a different situation. And really, it wasn't games. I wouldn't go to games regularly. It was special occasions. It was when my dad got free tickets from somebody else as a gift, we'd go to games. So it wasn't that regular. I did used to go to a lot of games at the Veterans Stadium, a lot of Eagles games at Veterans Stadium with my uncles and cousins. We had four season tickets for a long, long time. So that was great. That was regular. And it was we'd get to bring our own food. And ultimately, if you brought $50 with you or less, you'd have enough to get yourself in trouble with beers. Nowadays, you got to bring about $400 to the game to have a wild time with the beer and get yourself in trouble. And I am guilty of being detained in the Veterans Stadium jail on more than one occasion.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. So Keith, growing up as a kid, what was it like, with your family's ability to go to the games? I mean, did you find it accessible?
Well, I don't think myself or any of my family members ended up in any stadium jails, but...
Well, that's good news.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a lot of the times that we would do things based around, like my sports teams themselves. So we would have a situation where, I was a lot of youth soccer, so we would head up to Foxborough Stadium whenever the men's national team was playing. I was there for when we had that historic win over England back in the 90s, 2-0. But we always did things where, it'd be 10 to 15 different families, and we'd bring a bunch of food, and we'd do things in the parking lot ahead of time, like almost like, quasi tailgate and play games before then. And then, do something after. Similarly, when we'd go up to a Patriots game and whatnot, we'd be more in the tailgate aspect. I don't really remember getting too many things in the stadium, mainly because you had to get there so early because there's only one way to get in and out of Foxborough Stadium, or now it's known as Gillette. And, we're talking about this on the eve of the Super Bowl this Sunday, and what I've learned is that the average ticket price as of February 9th, according to Bloomberg, was over $7,500 a ticket.
That's insane.
That is insane. Now, I'm sure you can find some things as we get a little bit closer to to kickoff on StubHub, and the numbers are probably dropping somewhat. But think about that. You're not bringing your average family of four to go see the Super Bowl. Now, obviously, that's the pinnacle in sporting events, but there's a trickle down effect in terms of just getting into a game. And as Scott alluded to, the fact of the matter is, you're taking a family of four to a Phillies game. You're dropping probably somewhere in the vicinity of $350 to $500 between parking, food, the tickets themselves, the Philly Fanatics stuffed animals. Everyone's got to get a hat. It's not something that can be done, going to the game every night. It's more of like an event-based activity for a family, and it's expensive.
Yeah. So for our listeners who are going to be watching the Super Bowl after our show airs, after listening to us, as you watch these commercials, these are the types of things that are fueling the economy. It's that it's almost like they have priced you out as the average sports fan, so you stay home, so you're forced to tune into the game. So as you're tuning into the games, the price of advertising gets driven up, and the network makes more money, which then deals with the networks, or has a correlation with the network's deal with the league. And that kind of gives you a rough roadmap as to what the economy is and how the money goes from the consumer all the way up to paying some of these overpaid crybabies and overpaid players. But it's also, I think, had a direct correlation on a change in the fan experience. The fan experience used to be after a ball game, you'd go to the tunnel where the buses would leave from, or the players would walk to their own cars. You believe this? Players actually used to drive themselves to the games. Players would walk to their cars, and the players would come up from the tunnel and sign autographs. And now, you've got to watch a player do some weird stuff on Zoom and potentially, sign up for one of these services that allows you to pay to have a player personalize some sort of message to you or to a friend or a loved one that you want to send out. But the everything's transactional now. It's not like it used to be where it was a kid's game. Did you, Scott, when you would go to a Phillies game, what was the one thing you look forward to? Catching a ball? What was it?
Well, that was back in the day when used to bring a glove to a game, when they didn't have nets surrounding everything, so it'd be impossible to get a foul ball. But you know what I really look forward to? Not so much the Phillies. We used to go to a lot of Sixers games at the Spectrum. And after the game, going down all the way down to court level, and I used to pick over the stuff that the players left around and bring home their sweaty towels and use Gatorade cups. And I'd recently been to a game with my kids and just trying to get down on the floor with security being the way it is. And look, we live in a wild society now when who knows who's going to do the next crazy thing in public to get themselves on social media. But just getting my kids down close to the players for warm-ups or for after the game just wasn't the way it was when I was a kid. Different experience really at the Flyers game a week ago. And this is kind of different. I think the ticket resale market has really driven these insane ticket prices. But it had a little benefit to us last week. I was able to pick up third-row seats for the Flyers game while they were in the midst of a 13-game losing streak.
Don't worry, that'll probably happen again.
That's okay. That's okay, because we've got great tickets for $70 a pop. That's still not cheap, but it's not the $140, $200 ticket that it usually is.
That's right. It's one of these things. You talked about accessibility and getting things from the players, and then the security. One of the things that I've noticed that I've been very turned off by is going to the Sixers games. The teams travel with security, and these players and the teams have lost sight of the fact that it's really the fans that drive what they do. And we had a great experience. I took my son to the Sixers-Lakers game. I took a heap load of riding from my friends for, allowing my son to wear a Lakers jersey to a Sixers game.
I think you had one on too.
But LeBron's his favorite player. And to not leave my guy hanging, like you just left me hanging, I wore a Kobe jersey. It was the day after the anniversary of his passing. And I wore a Kobe jersey. But what's crazy, I'm sitting there with my 10-year-old, and the players were very kind to him. But he went, and when he saw LeBron, who didn't come out in the first half because he was in the back doing whatever he was doing in the back, and he came out in the second half, and that's my son's favorite player. My son was within 5 feet of LeBron, and my son merely said his name, didn't yell anything to him, didn't yell at him, didn't curse at him, didn't yell, go Lakers, didn't yell anything. He said his name, and he said his name out of excitement. He saw what would have been my equivalent when I was growing up to Dr. J, to Mike Schmidt, to, a player that I idolized as a kid. And security actually told my son that he can't speak to the players. He has to let them watch the game. And it was his name. It was the guy's name. So he's telling him, you can't say anything that's going to distract him. Of course, you guys knowing me, I wasn't able to keep my mouth shut. And I said, well, he's actually not playing the game, and he only came out in the second half. And by the way, that is his name. So, but, again, it's taking this kind of fan experience and changing the way that, the game is appreciated. You lose these kids, and what do you have after that?
Well, let me ask you this in the sense of just playing devil's advocate for this conversation. Obviously for lack of a better term, the physical interaction and the experiences that you guys have both just described has been, less than what was expected. But with the way that kids are consuming media these days in terms of the social media outlets of, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, don't you feel that the modern athlete is in some sense maybe more accessible that way?
So, and Zoom.
Sure.
So,
as long as they don't do weird stuff.
So, yes, I do believe that they make themselves accessible, but it's like anything else. They put up there what they want to put up there, but that added accessibility they're also profiting off of. So when they're raising social awareness for whatever product they're endorsing, and we'll use Instagram for example, people get paid a lot of money to post products and pictures with them when they're social influencers. So I wouldn't call that accessibility in the same sense when you're at a game and you could do something as simple as throw a thumbs up to a kid. Where's the downside? Where's the harm?
Oh, no question. We're not in any way, shape, or form defending that, but in just in the sense of, you go on Twitter and you see all these players, and I totally appreciate the fact that you're bringing up the advertisements and whatnot, but I mean, take somebody like Kevin Durant. He's well known for having about 6 or 7 different burner accounts that he's interacting with people all the time. And I just feel that there are other means by which the fan can get that interaction with the modern athlete. And I just don't think that's something that can be overlooked. And, just in the world in which we find ourselves, just things are so drastically different. I'm just thinking about and listening to the stories and perspectives that are being exchanged here today. It's clearly a much different product to consume than it was when, we were talking about it, back in the 90s and, our earlier experiences.
No question. We're going to take a break. When we come back from break, we're going to talk about these players and what standards are set for them versus, players back in the 90s, which to me feels like yesterday, but I understand why I used a 90s reference. I probably would have used an 80s reference. But we'll talk about those standards. We'll talk about the Hall of Fame. We'll talk about the legacy that we see these people create in front of our eyes and how that plays into our fandom. I'm Adam Malamut. We'll be back in a minute.
Celebrating 20 years of incredible success on behalf of their clients, Malamut & Associates specializes in personal injury, workers' compensation, government regulatory affairs, municipal court and traffic, family law and mediation, and employment law. Email Adam directly, adam@malamutlaw.com.
Welcome back. I'm Adam Malamut. This is the Adam Malamut Show. I'm joined here with my guests, Scott Sheldon and Keith Gentis. We're talking about the business of sports, and has the business of sports taken the fun out of the game. We've had a great conversation thus far. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation in our final segment. This is going to be part one of a two-part show. The second part of the show, which will air immediately following this segment, is going to focus on youth sports and what parents and their participation has done in changing the landscape of youth sports. So that being said, welcome back, fellas. Let's talk about our people that we hold in high esteem, the athletes that we hold in high esteem, and whether they're getting the credit that they're due, and how, the legacy, the legend that they're creating is impacting our fandom and the fandom of the kids who are watching today. Keith, what's your thoughts?
So just to kind of dovetail to something we alluded to in the last segment, or something I brought up, in fact, about the social media presence. And I understand a lot of things that we see are sanitized by different PR and whatnot for the teams. But one individual that really kind of stands out in my mind that has been doing a lot of positive things, and everything I've seen with him has been just done in such a upstanding fashion, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. And I probably butchered his last name, but that's not important because everyone knows him as Giannis anyway. Anything I've seen in terms of him, fan interaction at the games, or book signings, and he's definitely a young athlete that should be pointed out, and somebody, I guess for lack of a better term, somebody who's doing it right. He's somebody that stands out in my mind, and I wonder about that. How much plays into the fact that he's kind of from, he's obviously from Greece. He's playing in a smaller market in Milwaukee. It seems as if he's really been kind of, welcome with open arms in that community, and something that, he feels the need to, be that flag bearer, and it's just a matter of him not only just winning the championships, but, again, doing things right, in my estimation.
Scott, what's your thoughts?
In terms of legacy, first of all, we're dealing with players nowadays that went to high school and had a cell phone in their pocket. Legacy, I think, is a totally different thing for these players. I think a legacy now is look at their highlight video on YouTube and see how many hundreds of millions of views it had. And that's got more cachet than getting inducted to a Hall of Fame. So legacy is totally redefined in this digital social media space that we live in these days.
That's a great point. We talk here at the firm about, so at Malamut & Associates, we talk about playing for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back of the jersey. And, Scott and Keith lead by example with doing what needs to get done to help our clients and to serve the needs of our clients, not ever looking for individual accolades, but looking for what's in the best interest of our clients, and therefore what is in the best interest of our firm. And you see these players oftentimes moving around teams, and they're moving around, and I'll use Kyrie as an example, because he didn't like the amount of shots he was getting, or having to share the spotlight with LeBron, which to me blows my mind, because competitors, when we grew up, and I think for the most part still, competitors want to win. This guy wants his name, right? He wants to be the spotlight. And he's on the biggest stage in New York City, and he still can't handle it right there. So to your point, you're right. I think that the whole concept of legacy has kind of shifted for a lot of these players. I'm not going to generalize and say all, but the importance of the competition, maybe that's where our biggest loss is in terms of how we're viewing sports, how we are embracing the celebrities on a local and national level. The connection just seems to be lost. It doesn't seem to be existent.
Well, in terms of legacy, a lot of the conversations seem to be a little bit NBA centric. I don't think that was by design, just by the fact that we're in the middle of the season and whatnot. And you talked about the fact that you brought your son to go see the Lakers because that's a big ticket in town when they come to Philadelphia and LeBron not playing. And the term I hear thrown around is this concept of NBA teams employing this load management, where players just aren't playing as much as they used to because they want to save the minutes, save their legs for the playoffs. Well, okay, thinking back to when we were in the glory days of watching sports in the 90s, I don't really remember Michael Jordan taking too many games off for load management. He seemed to do just fine in the playoffs.
Look at the pitchers, right? They have pitch counts. Phil and Joe Niekro, they probably threw 200 pitches. Krause, you were a baseball fan back in the Nolan Ryan days, in the Niekro brothers, the Vida Blues. These are players that it wasn't, hey, this guy's pitches are getting to a point of 95, 96, 97 pitches. It was, what's his arm look like? Is he being effective? Let's stick him out there. Let's keep him out there. Scott, how do you feel about that?
Listen, the sports managing of teams has shifted from a performance type of analysis, and now it's a mathematical equation, a statistical analysis. So you're looking at bean counters telling you exactly how much a pitcher should pitch and what his percentage chances are of having a downward slide in his fastball after he throws a certain amount of pitches over his maximum amount. So I think that the way that the games are analyzed now by the front offices has a big impact on what we see on the field.
I agree. And, it's unfortunate. We talked about the attendance at sporting events. Every single one of these attendees, the plus 70 million attendees that watch a pitcher for 5 innings because maybe he has a rough inning, but they went to see that star pitcher, that number one pitcher. They're losing out on their opportunity. The 21,000 people that go, 21 million people that go to NBA games every year, to go to the Lakers game that happens in Philadelphia one time a year and not see LeBron James, who doesn't get paid by just the Lakers. He gets paid by the league. He gets paid, by the Nike shoes that you wear, or that I'm actually wearing today. He gets paid by the people who are there to see him. So to have somebody like that, not even, look, injuries happen as you get up there in your years and playing, your body breaks down. But to not even participate for the first half by sitting on the bench, there's nothing you could tell me that would convince me that he wasn't healthy enough to sit on the bench for the first half when he was out there on the second half for about 15 minutes, and then he left. The total number of hours that people spend watching sports is significant. I think they just need to do a better job at maintaining that connection with fans. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We could talk. God, we talk about sports all the time. We could talk for hours about sports. Unfortunately, we're going to have to do another show. We'll have to bring Mark Natali in for the next show. I know Mark wanted to participate with us today, but he was unable to. So I want to ask our listeners to please, again, consider following us. You can follow me on Instagram at attorney_Adam_Malamut. Twitter at Adam S. Malamut, ESQ. You can also search us on YouTube and follow our YouTube channel, The Adam Malamut Show. I want to thank Keith Gentis and Scott Sheldon for their participation. As always, thank you to Joe Kraus for his production and trying to make us all look and sound a lot better, which is not always easy. So on behalf of myself and the Adam Malamut Show, I want to thank you for tuning in. Please tune in to the second segment where we're going to talk about adult participation in youth sports. So for the Adam Malamut Show, I'm Adam Malamut. Hope to see you soon.
Thanks for listening to The Adam Malamut Show, a Jacob Media production. If you're interested in learning more about the power of the radio hour, contact Joe Kraus at 267-261-3428.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program has been pre-recorded.